Okay, let's get going. Oh, one other thing before we get going on Aristotle. This mildly sort of leads us into Aristotle. Last week I set a kind of bonus mark bounty. I was like, hey, whoever gets me some good information about a scholarly source on whether animals have Hun souls gets a bonus mark. And I got two sources from two different students. They contradicted each other. They gave different answers. But actually, so this paper, Brashear, 1996, Han Thanatology and the Division of Souls, actually clarified how and why that might be the case. So this paper is really, I found it really helpful. It explained that like people just thought a whole bunch of different things about these two types of soul. For example, a lot of people just didn't think that they were two different things. They talk about the Hun-Po soul rather than the Hun soul and the Po soul. So, and furthermore, that there was a kind of scholarly view, which is the one that I presented last week, and then there was a kind of like more popular view, and the scholarly view had the distinction between the two. The more popular view treated them as more or less related. But in this quote, the suggestion was that animals do in fact have both the Hun and Po souls. So both Zhan Hang and Yang Zheng wrote that even trembling animals cornered during a hunt are subject to the loss of their Hun and Po. So at least some people thought that animals did have the Hun and Po soul. I think that's particularly interesting, and it's going to be interesting as we move into Aristotle this week, because it removes one of the, last week I was like, maybe there's a kind of metaphysical distinction between humans and animals that justifies a sort of differential treatment. Confucius thinks you need to have reverence for humans, but mere care or love for animals. And I'm like, why is that? Why is that? There's two possible explanations that I can think of. One, that they literally just don't lack half of the soul that humans have. That would be the kind of answer that we're used to from this course, that there's some deep intrinsic difference that justifies treating different organisms differently. But given that not everybody thinks this, it at least weakens that potential answer. The other potential answer was this kind of ethics of care reading of Confucius, which was you treat people or living things differently based on how related you are to them. So you treat your family different than you treat strangers. You treat people from distant lands differently than you would treat somebody in your community, that kind of thing. And if that's I think that is a potential explanation for why the differential sort of treatment of humans and animals. We're a heck of a lot more closely related to all humans than to any animal of a different species, yeah? So it's not an intrinsic difference, it's a relational difference. It's a difference in our relatedness to animals that might justify the difference in treatment. I don't know. So thank you to both students. The other source was, it was in Chinese, so I don't feel too bad about not having found it. But Google Translate provided for me. It was from Matteo Ricci, who was one of the Jesuits sent to China to try to convert people to Christianity. And so he gives his account of the Hun and Po soul, and it's much more like the Aristotelian picture that we'll go over today, where there's a difference between the kinds of souls that we have and that animals have. Ricci's picture is actually very much in line with Aristotle, and that's not a coincidence, I think, because he would have been raised in a kind of Aristotelian tradition, being a learned Christian. So Christianity is massively influenced by first Plato and then Aristotle, after Aristotle was kindly transmitted to the Western world through the Islamic world. So the fact that Ricci thought that animals just had a Po soul and not a Hun soul lines up nicely with his Aristotelian way of seeing things. Okay. So that's from last week. Let's move on to this week. We're going to do Aristotle. So once again, like Confucius, one of the towering figures of the history of thought. If you haven't heard of Aristotle, now you have, but somebody has failed you in your education. And not all that far off in the time periods either. Aristotle's a little bit after Confucius, so 384, 322 BCE. He's ancient Greek. No, he's Is he Macedonian? I'm going to call him ancient Greek and not worry too much about it. And he's a very annoying guy because he's got books on practically everything you can imagine. If there's a topic that is studied in the academy, Aristotle probably wrote a book on it. Economics, literature, politics, poetics, biology, astronomy, math. He wrote it all. He wrote books and books and books and books. Now, he didn't come up with all of those ideas. He was largely doing a kind of synthetic project. Well, he came up with a bunch of original ideas, but also putting together ideas that were sort of around at the time into a relatively coherent worldview. And it was, I mean, it's the coherence of the worldview that makes it as influential as it was, I suspect. Like Aristotle and Aristotelianism, it doesn't absolutely dominate his day, but it gets taken up by sort of the early-ish Christians, and then the Islamic world is deeply influenced by it, and then Christian thinking is deeply influenced by it. The Aristotelian worldview kind of dominates what we would call science for, I would say, 1,500 years in Europe and the Middle East. Pretty massive influence on the kind of Western world. Okay, so. And Aristotle, the short version of what Aristotle thinks is more or less in line with what his culture thought at the time, which is that eating and killing animals is pretty much fine. Aristotle is pretty okay with the kind of moral superiority of humans, not in the sense that we're better, but that you should care more about humans than animals. Not everybody thought that. Famously, Pythagoras advocated for a vegetarian diet and also not to eat beans. He thought maybe beans contained human souls some of the time, so don't eat beans. No meat and no beans. Plato argued for, I think Plato probably himself ate meat, so Plato is Aristotle's teacher. I suspect Plato himself ate meat, but when he's asked about what the perfect city would be in the Republic, he says, well, they would be vegetarian, but not for the sake of the animals, but because meat is a kind of luxury that you can do without. You can survive without meat, and in the perfect city, everybody has exactly and only what they need. They're going to live a fairly austere life to keep it all perfect and simple and stuff like that. So, you know, there are vegetarians around the ancient Mediterranean, but they are in the minority. The kind of most common kind of culturally accepted view was you can kill and eat animals, you can use them for ritual sacrifices and that kind of thing. And Aristotle more or less agrees with that. So we got our happy meat eater here. Okay, yeah. Animals are, on Aristotle's view, lesser beings than human beings. They're less than us, and therefore you can kind of do whatever you want with them. And the thing that Aristotle picks out is something that I sort of tried to move us away from. And in some sense, I tried to get us off of this sort of assumption right at the beginning of the course. Remember when we talked about this Ascent project, and I'm like, why are our lives treated more valuable than animals? I think the quickest answer that people on average come to is because we're more intelligent, or we're more rational, or something like that. And I tried to flag that the Ascent project does not treat that as the central feature. They treat, in line with the utilitarian thing, they treat sentience, the ability to have genuine joy and genuine suffering was the thing. Aristotle, however, he's the rationality guy. He thinks that our human capacity to use reason is what marks us off from all other animals. That's what makes us better. And he's not just going to say that it's a kind of capacity it's not just a capacity, it's literally a different kind of soul that we have that animals don't have. So, okay. We're not going to go through all these. I just thought I'd list these out. And we're not going to go through all these, and I'm not going to make you reproduce them on any kind of evaluation, so don't memorize this list. You can if you want. You don't bother if you don't. From our reading. So our reading goes over a bunch of the ways in which Aristotle thinks that we're different than animals. The reading actually makes the case, Connell makes the case that Aristotle is not as black and white about this as some people have thought, so that the difference between us and animals on many of these are differences of degree rather than difference of kind. But things like calculate and recollect, and Aristotle's on the recollect thing. Aristotle says animals can have what you might call operant conditioning or something like that. Like you can, if you shock a dog with a shock collar when it goes in the wrong place, it will have negative associations with that place. What they can't do is remember, sort of absent the stimulus, they can't remember that situation. So they have a sort of like stimulus-based memory, whereas humans, I can sort of like picture what it was like 10 years ago when I was probably on this campus doing something like this. But that's a kind of a difference in what recollection we can do. Recognize right and wrong, speak with words, use technology, understand things theoretically, that's kind of the crucial one, count, deliberate, and laugh. So there's supposed to be a whole bunch of stuff that Aristotle thinks that we can do that animals can't do, or as the reading puts it more carefully, that we can do to a much greater degree than animals can do. Okay, so the promised, so as I said, a plausible reading of Confucius is that the differences that he sees are, I'm sure he would recognize there's a bunch of stuff people can do that animals don't, but the kind of moral difference is at least partly about our relatedness to animals. How distantly or closely are we related to them? Aristotle frames it in a very like intrinsic, it's a feature of the living thing itself that makes the difference. And specifically, we have a soul that animals don't have. Aristotle's got this sort of three-part model of the soul. Plants, all living, and so plants and all living things have a nutritive soul, the thing that makes you able to grow and repair yourself from injury. Animals have an animal soul that lets them sort of react and respond to the world around them. And then humans have a rational soul. Actually, it says man up there, and probably Aristotle would endorse that. He's not a guy you would want to like hang out with. When he says man here, he means men, preferably Greek men. So I don't think I would qualify as a human for him quite either. I'm one of the Germanic tribes from out west. He's extremely racist and sexist, just to note. But amongst adult landowning Greek men, he thinks that you've got this third soul, this rational soul, that lets you do things that animals can't. Okay, I keep using this word soul. And if you were raised in a kind of Christian context, you've got a very specific notion of what a soul is in mind. And I think Aristotle means something different than maybe you might think. But to explain his version of the soul, I got to go through a little bit of his overall philosophy to tell you to give you the right sense of the words that I'm going to use. So I'll very briefly do his physics, and then very briefly do his epistemology. Physics is his theory of natural motions. Epistemology is the conformity theory. Just a whirlwind tour through Aristotle, and then we'll come back to what he thinks a soul is with that stuff in place. Okay. Unless there's questions so far, questions or concerns? Good old Aristotle. Okay. Okay. Here's Aristotelian physics. The good news is there's no math. No math. Math is what happens to perfect objects, the perfect mathematical objects like stuff in geometry and the stars. The stars are perfect and regular and they do things nicely and sensibly. Down here on the Earth, things are kind of crummy and messed up. So math can only ever apply imperfectly. But the idea is the world is divided up into 5 elements, earth, air, water, fire, and quintessence. And each element, quintessence is the stuff that the stars are made of. Each element has a proper place in the universe. So rock is in the middle. Aristotle was quite aware that the Earth is round. Earth sinks to the middle. Its proper place in the universe is right in the middle of things. And then above that, water, above that, air, above that, fire. So if I impart violent, this is the natural motions, if I impart violent motion to a rock by throwing it up in the air, the natural motion will reassert itself and it will fall. And if I threw it at a lake, it'll fall down below the air and then down below the water and return to its natural, proper place in the universe under the water. That's why rocks fall down, according to Aristotle. Fire always goes up. It's trying to return to its natural place in the universe, up above the air. There you go. Easy, clean. Beautiful, right? And it can be confirmed by, think how many empirical observations this is confirmed by. Every time I throw a rock up and it falls back down, that confirms Aristotle's theory of natural motions. Isn't that great? There's so much evidence that sort of fits this. So, those four elements, those are the kind of, to say that something has earth in it is to say something about its essence. And the essence gives the purpose. The goal of the rock is to return to the earth. Not in a fully mental way. It's not like the rock knows what it's trying to do. For Aristotle, the world is full of natural purposes. Things are trying to return to their natural place in the universe. I don't know, did your chemistry teachers use this kind of language? The atom wants to have 8 electrons in the outer shell. They talked to me like, it drove me nuts when they started. What do you mean it wants to? Entropy wants to do this. Like, what do you mean entropy wants to do that? Very upsetting to me. I had a very mechanical set of mind. For Aristotle, that language would be literally, he didn't know about electrons, but if he did, he would say that's literally true. The rock is trying to return to the center. Fire is trying to rise up above the air. And that's because of its essence. It's sort of what it means to be earth is to try to return to the bottom. What it means to be fire is to try to go up and be hot and dry and stuff. Okay, so for Aristotle, everything has, if you want to understand or explain anything, you've got 4 different kinds of, let's call them causes. I think it makes better sense to think of them as explanations, because when we say cause, we basically only mean the efficient cause. Okay, so let me explain what I mean by that. We've got this urn. The urn has a material cause that is presumably clay and a little bit of glaze. That's the stuff out of which something is composed. The material cause is whatever it's made of. And then there's an efficient cause. The efficient cause is the story of how it got to have the shape and form that it did. So some potter sat down and sort of used their hands and a pottery wheel to make this shape. So the kind of pushing and pulling story of how it got to be there, right? That's, when we say cause, I think we mostly always mean efficient cause. The mechanical explanation of how it got to be. But there's also then a formal cause, which is the idea. So the potter, when they sat down, they had some shape in mind. They had some the form that they were attempting to construct. And if they're in a kind of, in a workshop, maybe they made 24 urns of this exact same shape that would share form between them. Shape is a kind of rough explanation of what he means by form. There's a kind of debate about how exactly to cash that out, but shape is, for our purposes, shape is kind of close enough. It's the, if you want to get a little fancier, you could say the kind of structural, functional relationships between the parts. The handle is on the side, which lets you grip it. The opening is on the top, which lets you pour things into it. These are features of the form. And then last but not least, the final cause, that is the purpose or goal of the thing. The urn is for containing things. It's for holding things in, yeah? So that's the purpose of the thing. And Aristotle thinks that everything in the world has these 4 causes. A material that it's made of, a kind of history of mechanical forces acting on it, a form that sort of just says what shape it is, and then a final cause, a purpose. So if you want to explain or understand anything, you need all 4 of those. Is that okay? Questions? This is, yeah, okay. Okay. And then the way, okay, here's his conformity theory of knowledge. When I go out to understand the world, I look at objects, I look at a variety of things, and if I am sane and sober and the lighting is good and I'm a landowning Greek male, I'm not crazy, then I can directly apprehend the forms of things. I can sort of reach it, like my water bottle has a particular shape, it has a form, and if I am viewing it properly, like under normal, good conditions, that form is in my mind once I've understood it. The form is in the bottle, the same form is in my mind. I take, in some sense, a piece of reality, the reality of this, I duplicate it in my own mind. We have the level of contact you have with reality in Aristotle's picture is extremely high. You should be jealous of people who get to think this. You should be jealous because, like, everything in the world has a proper place. Everything has an essence by which you can know it. And when you see it enough, you just get the essence of it. You have direct perceptual access to the fundamental nature of reality. And it's a reality that's very familiar to us, right? I have purposes and goals. Reality has purposes and goals. I have categories that I put things in. What I'm doing is just sort of seeing the categories of reality itself. It sounds nice, right? Like, I don't think any of those things are true, but wouldn't it be nice to think all that stuff? The world is sort of like exactly the way you think it is. That sounds great to me. We unfortunately have a view that the world is mysterious and deep and complicated and not what it looks like to us. It's very unfortunate, but we do better science. You do much better science when you don't believe that you can just see the essential nature of things with your eyeballs. Okay. All right. So, and one last thing, and then I can get back to Aristotle's the nature of souls. Aristotle is a hylomorphist, which should be distinguished from hylozoism. Hylomorphism is the idea that every physical thing is the combination of matter and form. Everything needs to have some material and some form that informs it. And everything that you see is a combination of those two things. Furthermore, the forms only get to exist when they've been realized by some piece of matter. So the form depends for its existence in some sense on having matter to realize it. So for Aristotle, there's no form of the square without some squares. There's no form of a cup without some cups. The form and the matter depend on each other in some way. Okay. Now that contrasts with, this is a old painting of Plato and Aristotle. Plato is on the left there. He's pointing up. He's saying, in some sense, this gesture is meant to show, Plato believes that the forms exist separately from matter. In fact, Plato thinks that before you were born, you as a soul, independent of your body, existed in the realm of forms. That you are sort of like an immaterial being that, you're bouncing around. It's like, hey, there's the form of the circle. Hey, man, how's it going? And then when you're born, you forget almost everything that you knew of that world of forms, and your soul is instantiated in this crummy body that is always breaking down, in this world that's always messy, and the elements are all mixed up, and the forms are hard to discern. But nonetheless, you can recall some of what you knew from that other, higher, realer world. And then Aristotle, he's making the gesture as sort of like medium. He's not pointing down. He's sort of like, it's somewhere in the middle, which is to say he thinks that there are forms of things, but he thinks that they don't exist in some separate universe, that they only exist in this world. Yeah? Okay. This is going to matter for when we think about souls, because, for Plato, so I said most of this. Have you heard the Plato's allegory of the cave? This thing? Yeah. So what this image is, so in the allegory of the cave, you, the poor, sad human in your normal human life, are seeing some shadows on the wall, and you believe that those shadows on the wall are reality itself. Poor sucker. You think that the world you're living in is the real world, Plato says. But if you escape, with the help presumably of some philosopher or other, you climb up out of the cave and see the blinding light of the real world of the forms, where the real reality is. Our world is a pale imitation of the reality of pure forms. And also, this means that your soul can exist separately from your body. And your goal as a person is to sort of like return to the real world from whence you came, which is the world of the forms. This material world is a kind of illusion that you should be trying to escape from. Okay. Okay, is that so far so good? Now, Aristotle says that our soul is our form. The soul for Aristotle, these three souls are three different forms that are instantiated in a human being. Which means that your soul is not something separate from your body. Yeah? It's the kind of shape or structure, the potentialities that exist inside of you. It needs your body to exist. Your body needs your soul to exist, your form. They can't exist independently of each other. There's kind of no life after death for Aristotle. Well, there could be. So in the long debate about between Christians after this, people figure out ways in which somebody who believes this in this version of the soul could imagine life after death. So some versions of Christianity have when the rapture happens. I don't know, after the rapture, after Jesus comes back, all of the people who are dead are resurrected, which means they are physically put back together. Their bodies are physically put back together. It's not that their souls are reborn into a different world. You rise up out of the grave and are sort of reconstituted bodily. So that's one way you could be an Aristotelian or have this version of the soul and think that life can exist after death. But I think Aristotle mostly didn't. And notice how different this is from a whole bunch of the theories that we've talked about this semester. So Hinduism, the Anishinaabe worldview, Confucianism, all of these had a version of the soul that could simply be separate from the body, that exists separately. Yeah, yeah.
In the sort of like hierarchy triangle
Yeah.
of it, right? Does that imply that we have three souls that are making up our form?
Yes.
Is there like a balance of them? Are they all playing like harmony with each other? How does that work?
Good. Yeah. So yeah, given that these three types of souls, the nutritive, the animal, and the rational, all exist in humans. They all coexist. And one way, Plato's version of what it means to be a good person is to have. He's got a very similar tripartite model of the soul, and his version of what it means to be a good or just person is precisely to have them all in harmony, to have them all working together. And Aristotle's got something similar that, like when Aristotle's a virtue ethicist, and he thinks that the human flourishing, the good life, is when you, through enough training and practice and experience, your animal instincts and your kind of basic bodily functions operate in harmony with your rational soul, that they're not fighting each other. That they kind of go, you want to do what's good. Confucius says something, not in the terms of the tripartite soul, but that's more or less Confucius' model of the good life as well. When you're morally developed enough, all of your parts operate in cooperation with each other. Yeah. Yeah.
So because we have three souls, does that mean we have three forms? Or is that
Yeah.
just one form?
At least three forms. At least three forms. Yeah. Yeah. One thing can instantiate many different forms. It can be informed by a whole bunch of stuff. Yeah, yeah. My water bottle instantiates the form of the water bottle, but it's also got a circle here. So it's got the form of a circle, and it's got a cylinder. It's got the form of a cylinder. It's fine. One thing can have many different forms all at once, kind of thing. They all inform it. They're not strictly material, so it's not like it's crowded in there. They got room for them all. But it's sort of your shape. So yeah. The soul, in the sense, is sort of your shape. But more than shape, it's sort of the shape of your potential and capacities, the things that you can do. That's your soul for Aristotle. Yeah. And again, very different version of the soul than the ones that we've seen so far. Okay. Okay, so. That's all backstory. I think we've got enough. Oh, yeah, sorry.
I just have a question for the picture we just saw.
Yeah.
Plato's cave.
Oh, yeah.
The people holding up like the individual caricatures.
Yeah.
What do they represent? Those people who are kind of misguiding you from.
Those are advertisers and marketers. those are the marketers that try to sell you things. No, I'm just joking. I don't know. I have no idea. It's a good question, and I have no idea who those people are supposed to be. Yeah, good question, and I have no idea. I joke when I'm cornered by a question I don't have the answer to. Yeah. So this is the people who are they're chained to a wall, they can't turn their heads, and they're watching these shadows go by. That's everybody. Every human that has not yet achieved the kind of enlightenment that Plato wants us to have of returning to the forms. Yeah, that's literally everybody, and very, very few people he thinks escape to see the real reality behind. If you've seen The Matrix, you kind of know this story. It's very unclear who these people are. I don't think that they are people in the normal sense. I think that they are, I don't know. There's a good answer to this question in the Gnostic Christianity. So Gnostic Christianity is a kind of deeply influenced by Plato. The Gnostics think that this is the demiurge. Yeah, they are very mad at Yahweh, who they think is actually tricking us into thinking that he's the real God. Yeah, so that would be for the Neoplatonic style Gnostics. That's who that would be. Plato does not elaborate. He does not elaborate on who that is. Yeah.
My grade 12 philosophy teaches that the cave allegory is in response to Socrates being killed, and how the people in the shadows.
Oh, maybe. I mean, that makes sense to me. Yeah. So, do y'all know the story of Socrates? Yeah, but roughly. He tromped around Athens, ancient Greece, and bugging people with questions. And he was so annoying that they killed him. And then for 2,000 years, philosophers have been like, I want to be like that guy. That's my hero. I want to be like the guy who was so annoying that they made him drink poison. So Socrates was the teacher of Plato. Plato's the one who wrote this. And it's plausible to me that, so in that case, these people who are sort of forcing people to live in the sort of shadows would be the people who killed Socrates. Now, the metaphor is weird because these people presumably know that these shadows aren't real, which means that those people would have a certain level of understanding and enlightenment of the forms. There's nothing in the text that sort of specifically blames them, but it's a plausible enough reading, I think. Yeah. Sorry, a bunch of questions. Yeah.
So would the implication of that be that people who killed Socrates could see out of the cave and wow?
Yeah, I guess so. That's why I think it's also plausible to read them as marketers, because they can see that you don't need that drop ship crap, but they want you to think that you do. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Could I argue that the men there could also be able to the 30 towers existing in society, and then wait for Socrates, because look, he's made this false delusion, we believe in the cave.
Maybe. These are interpretive questions that are possibly beyond the scope of this course, and I think we have very little evidence to go on in terms of, because we're asking about what was going on in Socrates or Plato's head, and he's been dead for quite some time. We can't ask him. So yeah. Well, last one.
This is sort of going back a couple of slides, but I'm not sure which one. But you said how it was sort of reinterpreted into like sort of Christian beliefs and things like that, and like this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
How was it handled by? Because wouldn't at this time would there be like sort of like polytheistic Olympian gods
Yep.
in Greece?
Yep.
Did this fit that worldview, or was that separate from what people thought?
Ooh.
Gods and stuff like that?
Yeah, unclear. Aristotle, actually, in this reading, Aristotle says something like the gods have better access to the rational soul than we do. I don't know. Yeah. I don't think that Aristotle lives in this kind of world of the polytheistic Greek pantheon. I don't think that the soul, in his sense, they were just like really large and immortal and awesome people. It's not like in Christianity where God has created our souls and is very concerned with our souls. That's the real object of concern. I think the gods were just large and attractive and morally dubious immortals. They're just very powerful beings, kind of thing. Okay. We've gotten. Wow, that was fun, but let's refocus. Okay, let's. Okay, so what does all this have to do with the course, and specifically with animals? So this is straight from the reading. For animals to have some small glimmers of reason, logos, and intelligence, phronesis, but absolutely no share in contemplative wisdom, Sophia Theoretica, and this is present among the gods on its own, just as humans are actually left behind in by many animals in precision and strength of their senses. So that was actually the line I was just thinking of. The gods have contemplative wisdom, kind of by itself. They don't necessarily have the instincts and the nonsense that we do. Okay, so animals have some sense of intelligence. He's happy to say animals have intelligence, that they can reason and stuff like that, but that they don't have something like wisdom. The translation is hard, and I don't want to make you memorize a bunch of ancient Greek terms, but like, okay, I'm going to make you remember. Well, I'd like you to know at least. I'd like you to know phronesis versus Sophia. So there's a whole bunch of terms in there. The ones that I'd like you to recall are something like practical wisdom and Sophia, which is sort of like theoretical wisdom. Okay, so again, this is Aristotle says, among animals that are wild and quadruped, the deer, that's four-legged, the deer is held to be a practically wise one, not least because it gives birth alongside the roads, for the wild beasts do not approach because of the humans, and after birth first eats the membrane. Practical. Okay, so phronesis. We'll do phronesis and Sophia, and then we'll take a break. Okay, so phronesis is it's practical wisdom, is knowing what to do in a situation, knowing what to do to like do the practical thing, sometimes called prudence as well. And obviously animals have this, right? Obviously animals do a whole bunch of stuff that makes sense. Aristotle is largely of the sciences, his main one that he actually did was biology, and he's clearly aware that animals like know how to get by in life pretty well. Like the example from, I've never heard this about deer, that they give birth near roads because other animals don't want to go there. They eat after giving birth, they eat the placenta. Both very sensible things to do if you're trying to evade predation and live in a calorie-restricted life. Those are extremely sensible things to do. Okay, but practical wisdom has this character that it is highly context sensitive. What it makes sense to do is relative to a specific situation that you're in. I don't know if any of you intend to eat the placenta from your young. Whether that makes sense or not will depend a lot on the context in which you find yourself, right? Stuff like that. There are no universal rules of practical wisdom, is the thing. And if you got any impression from the stuff about Plato and the forms, Aristotle is red hot on universal, timeless, eternal truths. Plato thought that the real reality of the world was timeless, eternal truths. Aristotle's a little more moderate than that, but he still thinks that they are the best kind of knowledge. So, I mean, practical wisdom, phronesis, that's the kind that's relevant if you're sort of making ethical choices. Aristotle thinks he's not a like hard rules guy. He's like a, do what makes sense in the specifics of your situation. He thinks phronesis is crucially important, but better still is Sophia, or what we might call just wisdom or theoretical wisdom. You don't have to remember episteme and nous, but just to say it out loud, it's a combination of like what he calls, I translate this as scientific knowledge. Lots of people translate it various ways. Episteme, which is essentially just knowledge of things that are always true. The Pythagorean theorem is an example of episteme. A squared plus B squared will always equal C squared, always has equaled C squared on a flat plane, of course, always will equal C squared. This is a nice example because it was derived by at least 3 different times independently around the world. There are Babylonian cuneiform tablets with this on. You find it in China, and I think you can find it in, I think the Aztecs did this as well. I don't remember the 3rd example, but like, everybody should agree on this, and it's not a matter of context or circumstance. So that's episteme, timeless, eternal truth, that are things that are always true, and then nous, which is a sort of the ability to understand that, the ability to grasp those timeless, eternal truths. So Sophia is much less likely to deal with, you need phronesis to get through your day, to survive your kind of practical concerns. Sophia is probably less to do with that because there are very few timeless eternal truths that relate to how to live your life, right? The rules about how to live your life are very context heavy. What makes sense one day might not make sense the next day, or it might not make sense 10,000 years from now. Whereas Sophia is supposed to be, the Pythagorean theorem will be true 10,000 years from now. So Sophia is much less to do with like the details of how to live your life and much more to do with cosmic eternal truth. And that's really what Aristotle thinks is the best part of us, and it's the part that he thinks that animals don't have. Animals have phronesis. They're really good, really practical. A deer survive a lot longer in the forest than I would. They're much better at getting by, and as Aristotle notes, quite often their senses are much sharper than ours. But Aristotle thinks they don't have Sophia. They don't have access to the kind of timeless, eternal truths that are this is the sort of essence of getting access to this stuff is what the rational soul is all about. He thinks this is the best. Surprise, surprise, a philosopher thinks doing philosophy is the best thing people can do, but that is what he thinks. No, I mean, I do think it's interesting. One last slide, we'll take a break. I do think it's an interesting fact that we're like this. This is from a paper on scientific explanation, not related to animals or Aristotle at all, but it picks out something that I think is worth noting. It's a remarkable fact about us that we cannot simply observe phenomena. We want to know why they occur. We can imagine beings who simply watch the sun set and the moon rise in the heavens, and they might come to expect regular transitions, but they would lack curiosity as to why the changes occur. We are not like that. Heavenly motions cry out to us for explanation. It does seem to be a very regular feature of human beings. And I have not yet seen any evidence of another species that's quite as like that as we are. We have gotten ourselves into some deep, deep trouble having this trait. Digging around in the fundaments of reality has caused us to possibly doom ourselves and most of the rest of the life on planet. It's not necessarily the best thing you can be. We might have been better off without it. But it does certainly pick us out from the other animals, I think, as far as I can tell. Anyway, okay. So let's take 10, come back at 5 after noon, and we'll talk a little bit about, I'm gonna make Aristotle and modern science fight a little. We'll compare some of Aristotle's views to some of the stuff that we know now. Okay. What I propose to do for the rest of the class is just look at 3 topics. We'll talk a little bit about what Aristotle says, and then a little bit about what modern science says about this. I've hesitated to do that for other kind of traditions or ideas in the past. Like, oh, we don't want to test this against, the point isn't whether they're right or wrong. But nobody cares about Aristotle, right? Like if I'm being mean to Aristotle, that's fine. I don't know of anybody who would feel like I'm being unfair to Aristotle. He's kind of a jerk. He's intellectually humongously important, but also, I don't know, somehow I feel like he's mine. Like I come up through the schooling in Western philosophy, like I feel like I'm criticizing my own here, so I don't feel so bad. Anyway, I think it's interesting and illuminating, and there's at least one study that I very recently heard about that I want to tell you about. Okay, so communication. So Aristotle's happy with the idea. He's perfectly aware that animals make noises that are meaningful to each other. though, he distinguishes animals without a voice, animals with a voice, and that he understands that like animals make sounds to each other that communicate information to them, right? But he notes, for example, that birds can communicate to coordinate migration. I don't know how he inferred that, but the thing that I found fascinating, he was aware that birds they don't have songs, some of them don't have a song innately, they get taught by their community or their parents, and not only that, but there are bird dialects. So birds in different parts of the world will have slightly different songs. Aristotle was aware of this fact. I'm impressed. Frankly, the amount of understanding, that level of understanding of the natural world is fairly rare for like philosophers, even today. But especially back then, that's pretty good. The thing that he thinks that they don't have is a proper language with proper communication. Like proper words that have meanings the way we do. And I think that might be false. Our human language is, as far as anybody can tell, by far the most complex, communication via sound or sign that we know of. But like, it turns out animals are a lot better at this stuff than anybody gave them credit for. This, by the way, this kind of thing is one of the most exciting areas in the application of AI to science that I know. I'm actually super hyped to see in the next 10 years, take just massive collections of recorded animal sounds and dump them into AI and see what patterns it comes up with. I bet they'll find some really cool stuff, and they are already finding really cool stuff with regular, more standard statistical methods. So here's a 2024 study. Found that African elephants have something like names for each other. So the researchers who were like observing elephants in the wild noticed that very often elephants move in sort of troops, they move in groups. An elephant would make a noise, and only one elephant would sort of like perk up and respond. They'd make a noise, and if it was a general like, hey, look at this, you would think all of the elephants would raise their heads and sort of pay attention. But frequently, it would be just one elephant would go, huh? And so they thought maybe the sounds that they are making are specific to one other elephant. And so they tested it. So they got huge amounts of careful behavioral observations while they're making recordings. So record instances in which one elephant makes a sound and only one elephant responds. Mark those all up, code them, and then do a statistical analysis of what's in those sounds. And what they found was they could predict, given the hypothesis that elephants are using names for each other, something like unique vocal signifiers that are supposed to catch the attention of other elephants, far better than chance, they could detect when an elephant was doing that. Evidence was a little less clear that all of the elephants in a troop used the same name. So it might be that each elephant had a unique signifier for all the other elephants, but that nobody had the same. It's like a Russian novel. Everybody calls each other different names, but everybody knows what the names mean. But nonetheless, that's awesome. I think that's extremely cool. So this is, and I really do think it's kind of early days in this style of research where we can do just massive statistical analyses on the kind of vocalizations that animals make. Okay. So now that's something. It's not nothing. It's certainly doing something interesting and unique with vocalizations that we didn't think animals could do before. It's not quite language yet, though, is it? It's not quite human-level language. There are some features of human-level language that are absent from at least this. It's not to say that elephants can't do those things, just that we haven't detected them yet. But consider the example. If you're familiar with the example of Coco the gorilla, a few of you have heard of Coco. Coco the gorilla, 1971 to 2018, lived her life in captivity, and a small group of scientists tried to teach Coco American Sign Language She couldn't make her hands do all of the shapes of American Sign Language. So there was those shapes she could do, they taught her those, and a kind of modified ASL for a bunch of other signs. And she could make, Coco the gorilla could make something like 1,000 different ASL signs, which is pretty amazing. Okay, so her handlers, the people who worked with her, were convinced that she would use these signs in meaningful ways to express her thoughts and beliefs and desires and all that stuff. They claimed that she could even produce novel signs. So she didn't have a sign, nobody taught her a sign for ring. And they think that what she did was combine hand and bracelet. So the kind of combination signs to create new meanings. Big if true, big if true. Now, this is one of these classic sort of like massive controversies in interpreting what people saw. Huge debate about to what extent was Coco using these signs to communicate her thoughts and feelings, and to what extent has Coco been trained that if she makes signs that feature in ASL, she gets rewards. So when you're trying to train a gorilla to use ASL, you have to give rewards when she does it. And so the cynical interpretation is what she was trained to do was just make a bunch of ASL signs, and that people would get extra excited if she made signs that were appropriate to the context, but that she wasn't using those signs meaningfully. And then those of you who are sort of steeped in some of the style of debate might ask, what do you mean by meaningfully? And that's just another part of the debate. Yeah. What? I mean, I personally have an inner world that I try to communicate to people using my words. I don't know what you're doing. It seems like you've got an inner world that you're trying to communicate with your words, rather than just. So sorry, that was a terrible joke, but like, is that what we're doing? Is the question? Is that what human language is? Just learning. So, and particularly, so I'm glad we've got the notion of conditioning, learning by conditioning on the table. The argument is, Coco is learning by conditioning. If I make this sign, then I get a treat with some context. Like if I make the sign for hungry at lunchtime, then I get extra treats. But that's not what you're doing with language, I take it. You're doing something much more sophisticated with language, which is knowing what that sign, not just what context to use it in a kind of like one-to-one mapping way, but rather what the sign means, and you can do much more interesting stuff with it than that, I think.
Wouldn't the hand bracelet
Yeah.
ring show that that's not what she's doing?
Good, yes, so okay, good. That's right, if she did meaningfully combine two signs to express ring, then that would be evidence that she understands the meaning of hand and bracelet, and that wanted to express the notion of ring. Now, the other part of this debate is about interpreting the data of Coco's behavior. Like, did she mean ring? Did she? What would count as enough or appropriate evidence that she did mean ring? Now, I'm not saying that she didn't or that she did. Just to say, this has been a huge scientific debate about how do you interpret the behavior. Yeah, and your original point is a good one, which is like, can't we just read humans like that? What if we just have an extremely highly detailed context sensitivity to like, I get rewards if I make these signs. This is a kind of behavioristic interpretation where, and this was a very real and live hypothesis in the science of language learning for a long time, that really how we learn language is just punishment and reward for making the right sounds at the right time, or the right signs at the right time. That is a less popular theory these days, partly because how quickly we learn to use signs. They're called the poverty of the stimulus argument, which is that we seem to pick up sounds and gestures and signs and all that stuff far, far faster than you would expect if all we're doing is associating context with signs. Somehow we do it. I mean, when you train, so LLMs do this thing where they know what the right next token to output is, but we had to feed them the entire internet and all the books for them to be able to do that. So that maybe they can learn the statistical patterns among, in this context, produce this sign. But 2-year-olds don't have the whole internet and all of the books. They have much, much less data to work with, and they seem to do it very regularly, actually impressively fast. So the suggestion is that means that our language learning can't just be learning by association or sort of like operant conditioning. It must be something else. There must be sort of internal structures that we're working with. That's the claim. This gets us into you're asking exactly the right questions here, but they're the questions that get us into this precisely into this debate, which remains, as far as I understand, unresolved. Okay, so one thing that the critics of the idea that Coco knows ASL, one thing that they said that her language lacked was what's called compositionality. I'm sorry if I'm giving anyone flashbacks from like linguistics or philosophy of language, but this is this kind of thing they debate. So, compositionality is this thing that human languages have, and it's just this, that the meaning of a collection of signs isn't a simple sum of the meaning of the signs. There are rules about how the order and placement of those signs affect the meaning, much to the dismay of some people and much to the rejoicing of authors of novels. Mary loves John and John loves Mary are two very different sentences. All the same signs arranged differently mean profoundly different things. And so compositionality is this feature. It's not just, you're not just mashing a bunch of signs together. You are putting signs together in an ordered and structured way where the meaning depends not just on the signs, but in the structure. So the argument is, the claim is Coco never made sentences where the meaning depended on this property of compositionality. And it's one of the things that's supposed to be very unique about human languages. One of the things that's supposed to enable us to seemingly be endlessly productive in creating new sentences. Like it would be the end of time before you ran through all the sentences that you could compose. How do we do that? Well, we can put these words together. The meaning depends on the words, but it also depends on their order. You can produce all these novel meanings using compositionality. And it didn't look like Coco's language had compositionality. And if it was 3 months ago, I would have told you that there's no evidence that animal language can have compositionality. But here's a 2025 study just published. Extensive compositionality in the vocal system of bonobos. Bonobos are kind of equidistant from us. Bonobos and chimps are our closest relatives in the animal world. And this study followed them around and recorded their voices. I'm sorry, you can't see what's on this graph, but these are records of the compositional vocalizations they make. There's peep, whistle, low hoot, high hoot, peep, peep, yelp, whistle, high hoot, yelp, peep, peep, yelp. These are kind of things that bonobos, the kind of sounds that bonobos make. And so what the authors did was very careful observation study where they sort of see what situation all of the different members of a troop are in, and then they record their vocalizations and try to find, so the statistical analysis shows how circumstances and calls correlate. So given a certain circumstance, say a predator has shown up, or somebody finds food, or two other members of the group are fighting, or these are the kind of circumstances you find yourself in as a bonobo. So treat the correlation between circumstances and calls as the meaning of the call. That's a pretty rough definition of meaning. I sort of just rejected it, didn't I? I sort of just like, it's not just circumstance, it's the complexity or the internal structure or something. But for the purposes of trying to test compositionality, that'll do the job. And what they found was, so individual vocalizations correlate with circumstance, fine, good. That gives you something of the meaning of that individual vocalization. And then when you put those vocalizations together, you get a new meaning that's related to the meanings of the two parts of it, but new. And furthermore, if you do Yelp peep, that meaning depends on both Yelp and peep, but also peep Yelp has a different meaning, also related to Yelp and peep, but different than the other order. So they found reasonable statistical evidence of compositionality in bonobo language. Ta-da! I know, it's not as exciting for you because I just taught you about compositionality, but people have been telling me for 20 years that the thing that makes humans unique is that our language is compositional. Our endless, infinite possibilities of communication primarily come from the compositionality of our language, and that what distinguishes us from every other animal. That I found it in bonobos this year. Yeah.
So does that mean that that they have that sort of ability to produce an endless variety of ideas? Is
Yeah.
it circumstantial? Is it constrained by what noises they can produce? Like, don't they kind of have the ability to have more than a certain set of sounds? I know that there's vocal chord structure is different.
Yeah. We're good at making a bunch of different sounds, and it sounds like they've got a relatively limited number. There aren't any bonobos writing dissertations, as far as I know. So finding compositionality in their language doesn't mean, bonobos are exactly as smart as humans are. And it doesn't mean that they've got the kind of as much capacity to generate novel sentences as we do. It's just that for my entire education, compositionality was sort of the hard dividing line. Say, we are fundamentally different than other animals in terms of language because we've got composition. They can make screech means predators, whoop means I'm happy, individual signs with meanings, but you couldn't put them together into more complex meanings. And I think it's interesting that they didn't try to, in this paper, they didn't try to get into translating what Yelp grunt versus peep Yelp peep means. They didn't offer a kind of lexicon for them. So they didn't assign actual meanings in the sense that we would understand meanings. They just sort of found correlations between situations and the vocalizations. It could be that they don't have meanings in the same sense that we have meanings. It could be that they are, if you could only put together 2 or 3 phonemes, you'd be pretty limited in the number of things you could express. Nonetheless, I think it's an erasure of what we used to think of as the hard. It keeps happening, doesn't it? Every time we think that there's a hard line between us and other species, we learn more, and then it's a fuzzy line. It keeps happening. I don't know. Yeah. So, is that basically? Yeah. Good. Piping hot, fresh science out of the Journal Science. I think this is fascinating. Yeah. What it means exactly is the kind of thing that it's probably going to be another 20 years before we have a clear notion of this. But again, this is one of these areas where I'm actually really excited to see what AI can do. I'm really excited. It's really good at dragging complex patterns that people wouldn't have noticed out of huge data sets. And that's what this is. It's a very exciting time. So watch this space. I think we'll learn quite a lot more about what animals can do with their voices in the next 10, 20 years, assuming that our civilization doesn't collapse or whatever. Okay, so there's language. Okay, yeah. Further questions on this thing? I don't know. Does that mean that they can can they use names? Can they use words? You got to do a big complex debate that we're not going to do right now because I'm lazy and there's not enough time. But like the bright line that used to exist is fading, in my opinion. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Aristotle thinks animals cannot recognize right and wrong. We have this sense of justice, and animals do not. That is less clear to me. I think there's this delightful little study from 2003, capuchin monkeys. So you got, imagine the experiment is something like this. This was in a TED talk. I'm sorry, it's silly, but like the experiment is something like this. There's two cages and one monkey in each, and there's a glass divider so that each monkey can see what's going on in the others. You train the monkeys on a pretty simple task. Give me or hand me a rock. So they're a little stash of rocks. The monkey hands you a rock, and it gets a food treat back. So and they can have either cucumbers, which are not a terrible food treat, but they love grapes. Grapes are a much better food treat for them. So you have one monkey, have it do the task. Oh, give me a rock. Okay, great. You get a piece of cucumber. And then you go over to the other monkey, give me a rock, and you give it a grape. And the first monkey sees this and is outraged to the point where they jump up and down, they screech, they bang on the walls. Especially if you do this over and over again, they can see that they are not being rewarded fairly, to the point where they will throw the cucumber out of the cage. They will reject the food. They will whip it at you. They will reject the food treat, which, like, these are lab animals, so their life's not awesome. I wouldn't trade places with them, but they're not starving. So like, but nonetheless, it's food. It's a really basic thing. You are offered food, you take it. But these capuchin monkeys were so outraged that they would reject the food reward at protest, essentially. They went on strike for this little task. I don't know. Just one example. It's a silly example, but like, I don't know. That sounds like recognizing right and wrong. This is unjust. They get mad. They throw things. I don't know. They yell. That sounds like right. I read that as understanding right and wrong, at least in terms of unfair rewards. Probably there are some versions of right and wrong that we get that they don't. Maybe there's some versions that they get and we don't. I don't know. Any objections? Any additions? Are there other examples you can think of, animals recognizing right and wrong? Go on. Many of you have had pets. Yeah.
Not that, but I was thinking, like, is it possible that it's more of a survival instinct, where it's like, oh, why am I not being given kind of like the same, I guess, like, preferable outcome? So it's more of like an instinctual sort of, like, self-preservation thing than it is an ethical consideration.
Yeah. So self-preservation rather. So isn't this so I guess the mystery there for me is, so quite possible, but the mystery there for me is, why would it throw the cucumber? Because if it's survival, you say, I'm gonna take any, in a survival situation, you take any food you're offered. It might be unjust, you might be mad about it, but any calories are good calories if you're worried about survival. Whereas this is rejecting calories because of injustice. And like, I'm not saying that that's impossible to read it as a sort of instinctual thing. I don't know, maybe that instinct makes more sense in a kind of, this is two monkeys, and generally speaking, primates operate in, not all primates, but like generally speaking, we operate in groups. Maybe it makes more sense in some kind of game theoretic group context, where like if you're being treated unfairly, you should make a lot of noise about it and draw attention to it so you get treated better in the future. Maybe, yeah, good. That's interesting.
I feel like it's about to kind of think about it in terms of, in sense, it's like emotional reaction, for example, and like there's that stability of like them being lab animals, they know that they're gonna be fed, there's that security.
Right.
And it's more of like a evolutionary, like almost emotional reaction without as dire consequences. But at the same time, like obviously I wouldn't know that.
Yeah.
But I do think that it's not like a clear indication of ethical consideration.
Good. Yeah. So we have this. I think that's exactly right. That we have the same kind of interpretive difficulties that we had with Coco. We've got a behavior, and if it was people doing that behavior, we go, oh, they're mad because of the injustice. But that's not. It's not as obvious. We should take take at least a minute and be like, can our interpretation, can we just say, well, that's what it would be like to be me, so that's what it's like to be them? Probably not. It's probably not that easy. So that is kind of what you're saying, is that there are maybe other ways of interpreting this. We shouldn't just automatically go, well, it sounds like injustice to me. That's good, good. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, good, good. And then,
I feel like to forego your own like kind
yeah.
of selfish desire, and for the other one to let's say like give up part of the grace and not have it itself to be like a very clear indication of like, oh, I'm giving up something of myself, which is my I guess desire to survive because I recognize that there has been like an injustice here.
Good. Yeah. So the kind of if there was subsequent sharing to mitigate the injustice. Good. Good. I have the vaguest memories of there being studies like that, but I cannot present the evidence to you right now. But that's good. That's the kind of evidence you'd want to see. Good. Yeah. Yeah.
I know, I don't have a dog, but I know that some dogs would purposely do what's wrong and to get their owner's attention. They'll make that naughty face.
Yep. They know what's right and wrong, and they specifically do the wrong thing. If you're being ignored, be like, I'm getting on that couch. I'm going to get on that couch, and you're not going to ignore me. That's funny. That's funny. The ultimate test of knowing what's right and wrong is when they maliciously do the wrong thing to get attention. Excellent. Yeah.
I remember watching a TED Talk a while ago that showed that rats sometimes have altruistic desires.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
if they have a companion, like a friend that's trapped,
Yeah.
but there's a chocolate or like a treat in front of them,
Yeah.
they'll sometimes choose to free their friend as opposed to going towards the treat.
Yep. And rats are also very social animals, so it makes sense that they would have some instincts about helping their kin or things like them, stuff like that. Yeah, good. Okay, I don't know. I'm glad that we unpacked this just a little bit. It's another case where, yeah, like Coco, what we observe of behavior, it's very tempting, for me anyway, to go, that behavior, if it was humans, looks like a sense of justice. Just like Coco as well, with the question of like, is she producing meaning? Then you have to answer what is meaning. So then to answer this properly, you'd have to say what it means to recognize right and wrong, which is a whole other thing that we shouldn't get too deep into. But yeah, so I think the ambiguity in this sense, at least, all this confusion and ambiguity in some sense is precisely the point, because Aristotle was pretty confident in like 2300 BCE that he had the answer to this, that he knew that humans recognize right and wrong and animals don't. Here we are almost 2,500 years later, and all of the best science available, we're still mired in the debate. We're less certain than he was all that time ago, which I think is kind of the point I'm trying to drive at here. That there's some evidence that, there's some decent evidence that animals do in fact experience these things and can produce meaning and can recognize justice. It's unclear. There's an ongoing debate, but we shouldn't be as certain as Aristotle was about them. Yeah. Okay. One last thing, and this time I'm actually going to agree with Aristotle. I think what he says remains true and poignant to this day. Okay, so I'll just read you this bit from Aristotle. It would seem that nature resolves to prepare for there being a feeling of care for the offspring. This is created in inferior animals only until the birth, in others until development is complete, and in those that are more intelligent until they are brought up. Those with the greatest share of intelligence become intimate and friendly towards them after they have fully matured, as happens in the humankind and some tetrapods. The idea is that there's a correlation between how long the period of care is after birth and how intelligent a species is. This is just a correlation, and I think that this is right, and I actually think that this is kind of profound. So this is my favorite parenting book by the philosopher and cognitive scientist Alison Gopnik, The Gardener and the Carpenter. what the new science of child development tells us about the relationship between parents and children. Let me start by explaining the kind of scientific basis. She gives some like advice on how to be a parent. Here's the scientific basis that she's drawing on here. So, consider the chicken. Your humble chicken is born and pretty much learns all of the skills relevant to being a chicken within a few weeks. Pecking, scratching, foraging, and it can be taught to solve some basic problem. It can be sort of like acquire habits through operant conditioning, but it's never going to be a deep thinker, your average chicken. They develop quickly, and they don't seem to be able to learn complex problem solving. Compare that to corvids, crows and ravens. Some species of corvid, they need help finding food for up to 2 years. So they need more calories than they can secure for themselves for 2 years. And that's a really long time in the animal world. That's a huge amount of time. Their parents and their relatives take care of them and feed them while they learn a bunch of stuff. But at the end of that development period, they're amongst the smartest animals out there. They can solve problems on the level of like a 2 to 4 year old human. This picture is, I can't remember if it's a crow or a raven, but there's a food treat floating on the top of the water that it can't quite reach with its beak, and just some objects around. And what the corvid figured out was that if it puts the objects in the water, it will displace the water, raising the water level, meaning it can reach the food treat. That's pretty clever. That's pretty clever. I've had cats that I'm very uncertain would have been able to figure that out. That's smart, right? Corvids have been observed not just using tools, but making tools. So like having a stick and like stripping off the pointy bits that make it more apt to stick into a tree to retrieve bugs to eat, stuff like that. So, Gottman's hypothesis is what you see is a kind of continuity. Chickens, corvids, maybe other primates, humans, the length of our developmental period. So chimpanzees often don't produce more, like they can't produce more food than they need to live until they're like a decade old. They need support for like 10 years before they can be independent. I stopped asking my mom for money when I was like 35. Like the period for humans can be very long. And we have the longest period. When we are born, we are the most helpless of the kind of like animals our size. We can't even lift our own heads. We have very few skills. Our instincts are quite limited. You know, like a gazelle is born, just like hops off and knows what to do right away. So why are we so helpless and hopeless when we're born? Why does it take us so long to get up to speed? Wouldn't evolution have fixed that for us? And the answer is no, that's actually exactly what we evolved to be like. Because that long developmental period allows you to not have stuff hardwired. It allows you to figure it out yourself, and in figuring it out yourself, the possible problem-solving strategies you can pursue is massively increased. If we had all of our knowledge hardwired, it would be hardwired for the Stone Age. You wouldn't have learned calculus. It wasn't a Stone Age problem. The fact that you can learn calculus is because you were useless as a baby. And it took you so long to put it together, make yourself kind of from scratch. It's my favorite thing about people, that we make ourselves from scratch. It's by far if I had to pick something about humans that is unique, it is how much we have to make ourselves from scratch. That's how we get to be smart, not because we're born that way, but because we were given the kind of like open field of play and exploration that allows us to become smart in a way that makes sense for our context. That's how we get humans on every biota on the planet. We can adapt to any kind of ecosystem that exists on this planet because we're not hardwired. The parenting advice, by the way, that comes out of this is simply something like, You as a parent, you might think you are a gardener or a carpenter. A carpenter, if you have a pile of wood, nothing happens unless you hammer, saw, shape, and glue it. It is your job to construct the chair. The chair will not construct itself. And some people think that parenting is like that. I must make my child. I must turn this lump of butter into a human. Whereas Gopnik suggests we should probably think of parenting more like being a gardener, where your role is to create a space, make sure that it has the right soil and light and air and pests or protection from pests and stuff like that. But the tomatoes are going to grow themselves. You don't get tomatoes, you don't make tomatoes. Tomatoes make themselves, and your job as a gardener is to make the space for them. So I try to follow that advice. I think it's very good advice. But I think this is kind of, isn't that what Aristotle said? So Aristotle is at least noting, like, look, if you want to end up intelligent, the trick is start off kind of useless. That's the observation that he made about this pattern in the animal world where these long, long periods of needing support, of having to figure stuff out slowly, piece by piece, that like older people have already got, that's maybe what makes us the kind of living things that we are. We are the adaptable animal. We are self-making cognitively to a degree that I think no other animal is, because we're so lost and helpless when we start off, and that's kind of the best thing about us, in my opinion. Anyway, that's my favorite. You're welcome to have your own favorite thing about humans. I think that's my favorite thing about humans, our capacity to make ourselves and remake ourselves. Anyway. Okay. Questions? All right. Let's leave it there for today. Next time, we're going to talk about Descartes.